Good evening, members. The chair is going to be 5 minutes or so late, so the meeting will kick off with the deputy chair and the chair until the chair does turn up. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, members. This meeting is the focus.
Apologies from Councillor Forbes and Sparks. Chair.
Item 2 on the agenda to approve the minutes of the Customer Focus Committee held on 1st of July, which is pages 5 to 16 of your report pack. Can I have someone move, please, with a true and accurate record of what took place? Councillor Pearce, thank you. Seconder? Yes, several places, thank you. Third item is a notice that councillors are reminded of any declarations of interest in regard to matters that I need to read before. Thank you. Item 4 is in regard to exclusion of present public. There are no item 2, part 2 agenda items on this evening's, before this evening's committee, so therefore this meeting is fully open to the press and to the public and online. Item 5, question for the public under Standing Order number 19.
Members see the chair, right?
We'll see if we can break our duck at the next meeting. The chair of the... The next item is to receive questions from members of the council at the Standing Order 20 in relation to specific portfolio holders who have been invited this evening. The questions have been circulated. There are further paper copies if members would like a further paper copy in front of them. They haven't got it to hand on their iPads. So I'll hand over to the chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Bishop. Apologies for my tardiness this evening. It was a pre-briefing that was right up against this meeting, so thanks for bearing with us, and thank you, Michael. Right, so we're back to questions from members of the council. Yeah, thank you. That's great. So we'll go straight over to Councillor Wardle for your question, please. Councillor Wardle. If you would, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My question is this. Following many reports that local people in the southwest are being outpriced from renting privately due to the increase in holiday homes, second homes and Airbnb let-ins, can the portfolio holder clarify the extent of this problem within the Exeter City Council area and whether a coordinated response with other councils is planned, including some form of local taxation and regulation? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wardle. The response is from Councillor Williams, I believe. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Wardle, for this very timely question. It sort of follows on a bit from the question that I answered for Councillor, in fact it was 4 questions from Councillor Atkinson at the previous meeting, scrutiny meeting. So there's an awful lot of detail there. So I would refer people to my previous response to those questions as quite a lot of background information. So specifically sort of continuing, I say that the challenge of affordability and supply is a significant one in Exeter, as well as in the surrounding districts of Devon and Cornwall as a whole. The Housing Needs Service has a small private rented access team that works with letting agents and landlords directly brokering homeless individuals and families into private rented property wherever suitable. The service provides a landlord incentive package including financial support to tenants, for example, a deposit and/or rent in advance, references, finder fees and/or home improvement, subsidy and ongoing landlord and tenancy support. The number of landlords approved approaching the council has reduced over the last 18 months, unfortunately, primarily as a result of the pandemic. The single most common reason behind the reduction is in local lets, is that landlords have been selling up during this time of inflated housing prices. A survey of 11 local lettings agents this week confirmed that properties are not being lost to holiday lets or Airbnbs, but being bought as homes, particularly by people moving into the area from other parts of the country, London being frequently cited. So these would be people who are going to be working from home. Agents report figures ranging from 40% to 60% reduction in the number of properties coming onto the local rental market. They also reported that minimum tenant income thresholds have risen to 3 times the monthly property rent. Previously it was 2 to 2.5 times. And this is likely to be the result of demand far exceeding supply, meaning landlords can exercise more choice, including financial security in their selection of tenants. Our survey of agents suggests a minimal transfer of property lets to the local student market, but a notable reduction in the buy-to-let market. Agents report that changes in taxation alongside costs associated with rising property qualifying standards have also driven up sales of former tenanted homes. Demand for tenancies has significantly increased, with 100% of agents reporting an increase in interest from prospective tenants. Some agents have reported phenomenal and sustained rises in demand, e.g. up to 70 viewing requests for a 1-bed property within 24 hours of being advertised. Other agents have reported tenants offering up to £200 over the asking rent for 1- and 2-bed properties. Despite fewer landlords approaching the council's housing access service, the actual number of lets in the year to date, that's April to present, is broadly on track with last year's outcomes: 31 lets in 6 months to date compared to 66 in 12 months from April 2020 to March 21. Pre-pandemic letting figures were lower than this, so there is no discernible pattern of reduction in actual incomes at present. However, the lack of churn of tenancies, as households have generally not moved on during the pandemic, may yet render an impact in the next 6 months. And specifically on your question about have we got any plans for, I can't remember the bit of the question was, local taxation and regulation. To my knowledge, the question of regulation control has not been raised at district housing services as such. Sorry, a regulator has not been discussed as such. District housing services have discussed the challenges being faced in the private rented market, but have primarily focused on more creative and incentivised offers to attract landlords rather than run the risk of turning them away to other less social sources of tenants, such as private letting agents. I think what it's telling us is that the particular situation in Exeter is there are some similarities to what's happening in other district councils, like for example in Barnstable and other areas in Devon, but there are differences as well. So we can't actually, it's not the sort of the holiday letting area that's presenting us with a problem. It's the change in people's approach to living, wanting to move and actually work from a new location. So that is happening right across the county. So it is not a very comforting reply that I can give you. The only thing I can say is that in the longer term, what we are doing is we have got the Liverpool Exeter vision of 12,000 homes by 2040. So I think that has to be the solution to this crisis. It's got to be more building affordable homes for both rent and purchase, and that has to be the way forward.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Wardle, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I do, Chair. Thank you for that. Thank you very much for that comprehensive reply. Certainly, it's not in my question, but the problem of people moving out of London, the South East and other places since the pandemic is increasing the shortage of places to rent, as far as I can see, because they're buying up places that were worth X million in those areas and coming down here and buying quite big places. So that accentuates the thing. But there's other aspects that I might touch on. The question of those that do rent out places as holiday lets. Apparently there is a tax situation where they can register them as self-catering and only pay as self-catering business rates and only pay the tax on that rather than the full council tax. And yet, some of these owners then can get for example, the rubbish and the recycling done on the cheap because they're not paying council tax. And that is in effect a subsidy from a lot of councils in Devon and Cornwall.
Question, please.
Sorry, I just wondered, is that an area, I do apologise, is that an area where you might look at? The other area would be coordinating with council. Do you plan to do that? Because my reading of the situation is quite a problem there, and lobbying governments about regulating holiday flats to comply with local rules and taxes, and whether this city council is going to review holiday lets where they exist to ensure that they're paying the proper amounts of council tax for it, which is spent on waste and recycling. There's several questions.
There's several questions there. We'll take it as a sort of clauses of one or two. You may need to take those away, Councillor Williams, but please.
I am going to take them away, but what I can say to Councillor Wardle, I expect a number of councillors like myself were rather horrified to read some headline news last week about, I think there were councillors in Cornwall who had asked their council to, for 62% of those people who were claiming COVID business relief on their businesses, which were meant to be holiday lets, and in fact it transpired that they were all second homes. I read that, I actually wrote to Bindu Arjun, our Deputy Chief Exec, over the weekend to ask whether there was any chance of something similar happening with the monies that this local authority has been involved in distributing. And I think it was Laura, I can't remember who, somebody, and was it Laura? Yeah. Did come back to me straight away first thing on Monday morning, saying that we had paid due diligence to how the monies had been distributed. So we're not suffering from that type of activity, very unfortunate activity, very unfair activity. So I think what you've asked are very, very good questions, supplementary questions, which I certainly will take away and will look into. If you wouldn't mind putting them in an email to me, and then we will follow this up. So thank you very much for that.
Those answers can be shared with the rest of the committee. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Thank you, Councillor Williams. I do apologise for, well, not my fault, but next door we're obviously competing with other voices, so I am very mindful of that. I'm not sure there's much we can do, so speak as loud as you can and not too fast. And if anybody is struggling to hear anything, then just wave at me, and I'll make sure the speaker is turned up a bit. Councillor Alcott, we come to your question now.
Thank you. At the end of September, central government announced the creation of a £500 million household support fund to help families in need meet essential living costs. Could the relevant portfolio holder provide an update on whether Exeter City Council will be the one to administer this fund, and if so, when residents can expect more information on how to access these grants?
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Councillor Alcott, for an excellent question. I'm really glad you asked this question because it lets me sort of update members on the sorts of things that officers have to deal with. Yes, Exeter City Council, I can confirm, is going to be administering this fund. The thing is that we're still waiting to hear from government as to what exactly it entails. They did confirm in an email to us on Friday that they'd had lots of questions from local authorities asking about it, and they were hoping to let us know sometime this week. Well, we haven't heard yet. I think what it does do is it illustrates the challenges that local government face. Yes, we are here. We love getting money from the government so we can distribute it to both our residents and to local businesses. But the problem is they announce something in the press and that's when we hear about it as well. So what it does do is it means that the general public then think immediately, right, I'm going to contact the council and find out about this if I want to apply for it. And of course we're not in a position to be able to respond other than to say, you know, watch this space. What happens is that we will, once we get the detail from the government, we will have to put together an application form, we will have to test that form, and then we will actually put it live and probably contact all the people that have already contacted us, and we'll also put out some communication. And the reason I'm saying that's probably how it will work is that's how it worked for the COVID isolation grant, where we have to do all that work. So it can take, you know, if we're doing it really quickly, we can turn it around within 2 weeks. And what it illustrates is the critical role that local authority are playing in supporting people and businesses, but it also illustrates the additional pressures that are suddenly put upon us, which we have no warning about, and it means that we then have to put officers onto that task, and they have to stop doing other things. And this is at a time when we're actually working at full stretch and we're having to make savings. So I would say I'm using this answer to appeal to the public to have, you know, to really bear with us. We are doing our best, but we are in a situation where at the moment we are waiting for information from government.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Orford, do you have a supplementary on the answer you've just heard?
Yes, thank you so much for that, and I think really interesting to hear about what happens behind the scenes on this, and the fact that you don't get that additional support to sort of put systems in place to run these kinds of funds. In terms of making them as accessible as possible to the public when it is set up, what are your thoughts around sort of engaging with existing community partnerships and infrastructure to make sure that as many people as possible can hear about this?
Can I just ask you, do you have something specifically in mind? Because, I mean, what we do, we'll send out a press release, and that information will be sent out to, we'll be sharing it with things like the CAB, so that we have all those networks. So was there anything specifically that you were asking about? So we don't just rely on a press release that goes out to, I think the news updates I know go out to about 9,000 email representatives. So that information will be going out to you know, like the community centres, those sorts of things, and through our community builders. So we have got ways of getting that information out, various networks. We're not relying just on electronic communication. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. That was exactly my question. Thank you.
Thank you both. That's very helpful. And we're coming on to a similar topic in our report in a little while. Very pertinent question. We come now to another question from Councillor Alcott, this time to Councillor Hussain. Councillor Alcott.
Thank you again. Yeah, on a similar note, as winter approaches with rocketing energy costs, the withdrawal of the £20 universal credit uplift at the end of the furlough scheme, these all risk pushing hundreds of thousands of families into fuel poverty. Can the relevant portfolio holder outline what support Exeter City Council is offering to council and private tenants who are struggling to keep their homes warm or facing impossible choices between essential household expenditure?
Again, thank you for the question, Councillor Alcock. Again, it's very topical, and you will remember that very recently some of the councillors we approached the government to appeal to the government to not to take away the uplift, the £20 uplift from people on universal credit. Several of our councillors here signed a petition and we sent it through. That is one of the things we could have done and we did it. Before I start answering your question, I'm just going to point out two things. The first one is that there are some of your questions, especially the last couple, about the struggle for people to pay their to keep their houses warm and to pay for essential expenditure. That really is an area where we have an overlap with other portfolios, but I will do my best. The second bit I want also to point out to the presentation that is coming next, item 7, which will tell us in detail what is the role of Exeter City Council in supporting people who, not just all the homeless, but supporting them, people who are on universal credit or in hardships. So you will see what is the difference between our statutory services that we absolutely have to do and our discretionary services that we have some funding for, but not very much. So, and also to remind everyone that Exeter City Council is a district council, and we don't, some of the stuff that you mentioned, we do not have direct statutory responsibilities for.
Thank you, Councillor. I think your sort is going to be fairly lengthy, so if you wouldn't mind coming to that, that would be great. Thank you.
So Exeter City, regarding to that question you've asked, is Exeter City Council is continuing to resource Citizens Advice Exeter as part of a 3-year contract to provide advice, guidance, and practical support to those residents suffering from financial hardship. We are continuing to support local community and charity food organizations by developing a local network to better focus resources and access to free food to those residents who are most in need. We are supporting the health and well-being of residents across the city, and particularly those most disadvantaged through COVID, by delivering our flagship program, Wellbeing Exeter, and that we have to continue. We have got money for it to continue to 2024. Supporting residents in financial difficulty at this challenging time is a priority for this council. As a landlord, we work closely with our tenants to help them meet their financial obligations using solutions tailored to the circumstances of the household. This includes checking they are claiming all they are entitled to, re-profiling rent payments due to us to create a temporary breathing space, and signposting to grants available as well as other avenues of support. We have limited discretionary funds that we can draw on to help in times of crisis. And those funds are used to help private tenants too. Our Wellbeing Support Hub, as referred to above, set up during the initial stages of the pandemic, continues to take calls and online requests for assistance, and as well as our staff dealing with those requests draw on support available within the council. Staff are aware of 2 government schemes available to alleviate fuel poverty and will ensure information is available to residents and, if needed, help them to claim. There are 2 things that are coming up, which is the Warm Home Discount Scheme, provides £140 rebate on energy bills to low-income households. And this is coming from the 18th of October. Again, it's got very strict criteria which Laura and others officers had to elucidate. The other one is the cold weather payment scheme. Starts on the 1st of November and eligibility again depending on getting certain benefits and very strict. The recipients can have about £25 for each 7-day period of very cold weather. This is between November and the 31st of March. So as you can see, this is a very specific criteria, and you have to fulfill all of these criteria in order to get this money. For me, this is what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Alcott, did you have a supplementary question?
No, but I just wanted to thank you, and I think it's really useful for people to hear about those 2 upcoming schemes. And I also just wanted to congratulate the council that it's still running its wellbeing support hub after COVID. I think that's really, well, we are still in the middle of a pandemic, but I think it's really important, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you very much. We move on to a question to the portfolio for council housing developments and services, which is Councillor Wright. Again, we come to you, Councillor Alcott.
Thank you. Again, on a similar topic, can the relevant portfolio holder also provide an update on the council's Retrofit Program and what progress has been made to improve the energy efficiency of council housing and reduce fuel costs?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll be very pleased to give that update. So we confirmed earlier this year that the Council, through the HRA Housing Revenue Account, had put forward £1.3 million, which was then almost matched by a government grant, which was secured by our officers for £1.1 million, so a total of 2.4, to start to tackle fuel poverty with some of our least efficient council homes. And also to go towards our objective as a council of achieving carbon neutrality for all of our housing stock by 2030, which we're certainly on track to doing. So delivery of the first part of the programme this year has seen retrofit measures completed on 120 properties so far, with another 100 coming forward to be completed by the end of the financial year. So this will use up the £1.1 million government grant funding for those 220 properties. At the moment, we focused on properties in the primary ward of the city of Burton House Lane. The retrofit programme sees the whole house refurbished to deliver the very highest energy standards, and this includes a whole new heating system. I always get this round the wrong way, so I might have to check with Lawrence if I say round source air heat pump. That's fine, thank you. I know what it does, I just always get it round the wrong way. So basically the warmth is generated from sucking warmth out of the ground that's already there and pumped into the house, which is fantastic. These houses also have complete wall and roof insulation, new windows and doors, and solar panels. Another word I can't say, usually photovoltaic, but it's solar panels. So this is really going to reduce the fuel consumption, obviously, in these houses, really increase the comfort and the health factors inside the houses for our tenants. So far we've got some early data, which is really exciting to me. So from the first phase, the average energy performance ratings have improved from band E to band B, with 42 of the first 100 properties achieving a rating of A. So we're really obviously very pleased about that. We've reduced carbon emissions for the 120 properties from an average of 4.5 tonnes per property per year to 0.4 tonnes per property per year. I might actually say that again, Chair, if I'm allowed to, because I think it's quite astounding. Thank you very much for that. So a reduction of 4.5 tonnes to 0.4 tonnes per year per property. That's a 90% reduction in carbon emissions. We're working very closely with our tenants on the affordable warmth aspects, and to date we've seen some large reductions in their fuel bills. We're doing case studies and collecting testimonies, which are currently being collated, and we're going to go back again as we get further into the winter, because obviously the fuel consumption will be different from how it was in August. But so far this is looking really, really good. Our officers have worked brilliantly on it, and we're totally on track to get to the target to do all this by 2030.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor O'Connell, do you have a supplementary?
No, but thank you, that's phenomenal, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your excellent questions. And thank you, Councillor Wright. The remaining questions, I think, are all for Councillor Harvey. And if the committee will indulge the chair, the first couple are from me. So the first question is, could the portfolio holder provide a brief update on the very welcome recent trial of electric-powered waste collection vehicles, an electric-powered waste collection vehicle, and the plans for rolling out curbside food waste and glass collections? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, councillors and other attendees. Yes, I can give a very brief update, and I'm sure you'd appreciate that. It was fantastic. Right, do you need to know any more? Shall I tell you some more? Yeah. Right, we had it's called eCollect. That's how it's described by the manufacturer, Dennis Eagle. We had it here for a few days, and it gave an opportunity for a couple of drivers and crews to sort it out, try it out. They were all very positive about the vehicle, and I suspect probably the most important issue was it completed a day's round of what one of our diesel vehicles would do with charge left. So it didn't have to return to base to recharge in order to complete what is one of our current standard rounds. Okay, so that's it worked just as effectively as one of our normal diesel vehicles, but blimey, is it ever quiet. I took the opportunity to go out with it, and it is quiet. And I received apparently we've received a number of complaints from residents who don't put their bins out the night before, but hear the bin lorry coming down the street, clattering and banging at the bin lorry, and then they rush down in their jammies and dressing gowns and put their bins out on the street, and apparently they couldn't hear it, so they missed their collection. Right? So that's going to be a problem for us to try and sort out, but I'm not entirely sure that that's a problem with the vehicle. So we've got zero emissions, we've got quieter, we've got less noise for our loaders working alongside the vehicle, and we are now investigating the financial costs of adding these vehicles to our fleet. And as I will describe later on, there are some difficulties with the supply chain. The first part of the food collection rollout is being hampered by, I don't wish to be too harsh, by the lack of the containers. Right, so we would need more containers, both the caddies that go in people's kitchens to put the food into, and then the containers that they transfer them into outside the home. They've been on order for some time, and I was advised this morning that we expect them next week. I take that with a pinch of salt, but we are expecting them next week. The big difficulty is, you all know about lack of delivery drivers. Yeah, that's the problem. It's getting them actually delivered. It was firstly getting the plastic pellets into the factory to make them, and that couldn't be done, and then it was getting them delivered here. And unfortunately, our order is only a part load, so it's quite difficult for the manufacturer to acquire haulage to get them down here. But we're told next week. Yeah. Then we need to deliver them out to individual homes, and we're also doing a complete comms package to explain to people what they need to do, how they need to do things differently, so on and so forth. We've done a tremendous amount of work here. We have to work with the Environment Agency. Carrying food waste isn't something that you do just ad hoc. You need to have regulatory approval, so on and so forth. And we've worked with our colleagues, and I'm very grateful to them, from East Devon. So our vehicle, which is on site, and I will offer anyone who wishes to go and look at it, you can go and look at our first vehicle, which is currently on site as we speak at Oakwood House. So if anybody wants to go out there and look at the vehicle, then you're quite entitled to do so. We shall arrange that for you if you want to get in touch with either me, the director, or Craig out at Oakwood House. So the vehicle's on site, and we're just waiting for the collection boxes to arrive. We'll advise people, and then we'll rock on with it. So that's good news. Curbside Glass is a slightly different story. Again, the supply chain for vehicles. Now, I have explained this before, but I'll explain it again. What we are going to do is that the vehicle which currently collects your commingled collection of cardboard and so on, your green bin, right, will have a separate hopper or container on the vehicle to put the glass in. So you'll separate the glass out and put it in a bin in your home, and you'll put it out on the street, and we'll put glass into the vehicle and the rest of the commingled as we do currently in the green bin. Now that means that we have to put a container onto the vehicle, right? Now, what's the first question you ask yourself? How big's that container got to be? Yeah, that's the first question you ask yourself. We have no way of telling what the government's DRS, the proposed deposit return scheme, will do to the collection of glass. So this is a government scheme which is currently going through Parliament, as Councillor Jobson told me last full council meeting, but they have not yet decided the details of how this scheme will work. Because we haven't got the details of that scheme, we cannot make any sensible stab at how these vehicles are going to be specified in terms of glass hopper and commingled hopper. Now, you may call me risk averse, but I am not, unless I'm advised otherwise, committing this authority to the expenditure on 8 or so RCVs, refuse collection vehicles, at £250,000 upwards, which will be on the fleet for 7 years as a minimum, without at least some idea of how to specify the glass, the size of the glass hopper and the commingled hopper. And if anybody wants to know the difficulties that surround that, then go and ask your colleagues from Teambridge what sort of a muddle they found themselves in because of the pandemic changing purchasing habits. So they have to return their cardboard section with the other sections of their lorries nowhere near full. They have to return 5 times a day to their base, and I do not want to commit this authority into that sort of difficulty, and unless advised otherwise by a full council vote, I won't. So there we are with that. Having done that, we will then be into the supply chain issues which I described previously, about how we can actually get hold of the vehicles. So, and the difficulty there, as I've already mentioned at these meetings, is that we probably won't be the only council wanting to change their vehicles or upgrade their vehicles or doing something different when the government actually comes up and makes its own mind up. And as you can well imagine, the way the market works, when Manchester come along and want to buy 250 vehicles, or Leicester or Liverpool or Birmingham or Derby or wherever, then our little order of 8 vehicles or 2 or 3 or whatever it is may not. However, there is a patch of bright light here. It may be that we could just sneak a couple of vehicles on the back of Manchester's or Liverpool's order, yeah, so that we can get them. So that's where we are with that. I hope that's fairly detailed.
That's helpful. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. My supplementary was going to be on a very similar subject to Councillor Sparling's question, so I'll spare you that for now, but we'll come back to that under Councillor Sparling's questions shortly. So we'll move on to the second question from myself, which is, could the portfolio holder provide a brief update on the very welcome, sorry, this one, not one. Here we go. My helpful recent discussion with the interim waste, recycling and fleet lead about bins being left blocking pavements, which can cause inconvenience and sometimes even dangerous detours into the road for people who may be elderly, disabled or who have pushchairs. Could the portfolio holder or an officer please confirm whether, to incentivise responsible behaviour by households and landlords, the council will look again at charging for replacement green bins, as it does with black bins, that have had to be removed by the council team after a reminder sticker has first been issued but ignored?
Thank you, Councillor Bizard. I have personal knowledge of this issue of pushchairs and wheelchairs on the highway. I have fought for 5 years when the funding has been available to get a bus shelter for the new Harrington's estate in Pinhoe. And the reason we couldn't have it is because the pavement was a standard width and you need to leave a certain amount, I think it's 2.1 metres wide, for pushchairs and wheelchairs, which is exactly the problem Councillor Bizarre is identifying. We've finally managed to get, bus shelters are a county issue, a county contract. We've finally managed to get the bus shelter in place, and it's a special narrow bus shelter. That means that it's not quite as wide, it's not quite as much protection from the weather, but there is protection from the weather. So I'm very aware of this problem. Now to go to green bins and the problem with green bins. Well, we used to charge for green bins, but as you know, several people are worried about our recycling rate. So we thought that we'd stop the charge for green bins in an effort to boost recycling rates so that people couldn't say, well, you're charging whatever it is for a bin, so I'm putting all my stuff in the grey bin. So that's what we did. And it's important to ensure that we capture everything which can be recycled to ensure that it just doesn't simply end up in the residual bin. An additional green bin in larger households encourages recycling, and we want to remove any barrier to recycling wherever we possibly can. We work hard with landlords every year prior to students returning to ensure that they're clear about their responsibilities for waste and recycling for students, but that unfortunately doesn't always transfer to the tenants. And we will continue to work with them to improve presentation of bins for collection and their removal afterwards.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. I might follow up on the landlord's issue outside of this meeting, but that's helpful. Thank you. And the question that I was coming on to, my third question, which is effectively a supplementary to this one, is whether the council will consider adding a function on the website for the public to report bins that have been left out on pavements or in roads after collection for, say, longer than 24 hours. Thank you, Councillor Bizarre. I'm very proud of the residents of Exeter because I do, and if it's wander the streets, do I wander the streets? I do walk about, certainly my ward, and I am out and about across the city quite a lot. And if you get out early enough, you see forests of bins all over the place where the refuse truck is coming that day. And then a couple of hours later you go back, the refuse truck has been there and people have brought their bins in. The residents of Exeter are very good indeed about returning their bins to within their own property. And bins left on the streets are not a large problem across the city. In my time as portfolio holder, I've possibly had 1 or 2 complaints, but no more. It's not a huge problem. There are a few hotspots where people don't look after their bins properly, and we occasionally return with reminders for those people to take their bins in and keep the footpaths clear and pavements clear of obstructions. There is no specific reporting mechanism, you're quite right, Sir Councillor Villard, but it could easily be reported via the general inquiries form. So on the website there is a space for general inquiries and it could be reported on there. We could introduce a separate reporting channel, but as the instances are fairly low, it would have to be a lower priority when compared to some of our other tasks that we're trying to get on with. So in principle, it's not a major problem, and if people really want to do it, they could do it on the general inquiries. Okay, thank you, Councillor Harvey. That's very helpful. I don't have a supplementary to my supplementary. We'll come to Councillor Sparley's question now. Councillor Sparley.
Thank you. Residents have been in contact asking for more details of the food waste collection service. Can the portfolio holder confirm if a page will be added to the Council Bins and Recycling webpage to include updates on the implementation of the food waste collection trial and service rollout, with details such as areas to be covered in the trial and an estimated timeline of implementation of the trial and full rollout?
Thank you, Councillor Sparley. Thank you very much. We don't really like to refer to it as a trial because we don't think it is a trial. We know what we're doing, we've got a plan, we know where we are. Having said that, yes, of course, if we discover that there are areas of the rollout that need to be polished and that we've learned tasks from it, we will take those tasks from it. Yes. I'm a bit loath to press the button on the full comms rollout, which is ready to go. Because, as I said earlier, we've been let down several times on the delivery of the containers, and I don't really want to press the button on the comms rollout saying we're going to start fortnight Monday, 3 weeks Monday, whatever date it is, to find that we can't because the kit doesn't arrive, and that will create a negative vision of the City Council and probably a considerable amount of disquiet and further questions to both you as councillors, me as the portfolio holder, and the City Council staff in general. We do have a fully developed comms package and will have a dedicated recycling communications officer. The information for residents will be spread across a range of media, including our website, social media, and sent directly in print form to each resident or each household as we begin the rollout. The first phase of the rollout, as I said, will be used to gather information and data on productivity and highlight any obstacles which we'll use to tweak the remaining rollout across the city. Once that first phase has run for a reasonable length of time and we have the data we require, together with information from suppliers on lead times for new vehicles and containers, we can develop a detailed programme for the remaining phases. Now, I've saved the good news till last, or perhaps Councillor Spalding might have a supplementary for me, so it might not be last, right? But we have a vehicle on site, which is a 7-ton vehicle, which, as those of you who know about vehicles, has a certain turning circle, load capacity, etc. We also have a vehicle which we are having on trial in November, which is a 12-ton vehicle, and we have first refusal on it from the manufacturer, so we've got a second vehicle, so there will be a further rollout, hopefully, before Christmas, I think I can say that, before Christmas, which demonstrates our understanding of the city and how we need different sized vehicles to approach different places. So places that have the city centre, narrow streets, lots of parked cars, the smallest vehicle we can possibly get that is appropriate to put waste in, and places like my ward of Pinhole, which is slightly wider streets, a lot of drives, less cars parked on the street, so on and so forth. So this demonstrates the understanding that the officers have of the city and how we are doing our level best to iron out all the views and problems before we get there. Now, that doesn't mean that our officers will find every single problem, because I don't think they will. But what I can assure you is there's a tremendous amount of work being done to ensure that this rollout goes as swiftly and as smoothly as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. You've expanded a bit, but actually I think it was useful for us to hear that, so I've allowed you some leeway on the answer there. But Councillor Spalding, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, please. As you've mentioned that you have a full plan, can I ask you to confirm that residents have been, there have been discussions with residents as to how the more difficult areas, like such as the city centre, will be sort of how they'll be affected with the rollout and how it will actually be brought about, so that the food waste can be collected easily from those areas.
Discussions with residents. Not entirely sure quite how that would work and how we would, if we wanted to, how we would have done that. We have officers who have not only the drivers and loaders who report to us all sorts of difficulties regarding where bins are placed, communal stores, all those sorts of things. So the drivers and loaders on the street, we've had members of staff out on the street looking at those difficulties. Our general approach to waste is that residents present the waste to the highway, and that is what this scheme is about, presenting waste to the highway. All it is doing is expanding the streaming the waste itself. So there will be people who put glass, for example, in a grey bin currently because for whatever reason they're unable to or don't want to go to a glass bank. So we're hoping to take that glass out and have it put into the bin on site. So I'm not sure that we've actually done a huge amount of discussion with residents. There will have been discussion with residents because the bin guys talk to residents, but we're fairly confident that we have a workable and appropriate model to collect these two new streams of waste.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Members might want to act as a bit of a conduit from their residents up to, I'm sure Councillor Harvey and the team wouldn't mind if there were questions that are raised with us all on the doorstep or through emails on those sorts of things. That might be the way to do it. But thank you, that's very, very helpful. We come now to Councillor Mitchell, who has a question.
Thank you. Can the portfolio holder provide an update regarding the implementation and ongoing monitoring of the Clear Streets Charter?
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Yes, the Clear Streets Charter is very close to my heart. I went out on a day with people from the Northern Royal National Institute of the Blind with special glasses and sticks to see exactly what difficulties people actually encountered in the high street. And as a personal issue, I personally support the Guide Dogs for the Blind and support a puppy in training, which is a very satisfying thing for me to do. So, the Clear Streets Charter is managed jointly by Devon, the County Council, and us. As legislation surrounding obstructions on the public highway is enforceable under the Highways Act, the inspections and any enforcement activity are undertaken by Devon as the highway authority. The inspections are tied in with their general safety inspections, which look for defects such as trip hazards. Primary walking routes, which will include most of the commercial part of the city centre, are inspected monthly. Most enforcement so far has been of an informal nature, with businesses complying once the danger to people with sight defects or those who are less mobile has been explored. Informal discussions are not routinely recorded, and to my knowledge there has not been any requirement for formal enforcement so far. What I can add to that is you will probably have seen an increase in street cafes in Exeter, which are to some extent constrict flow on the pavements. Those are regulated by us and we give licenses, pavement and street licenses. I'm not entirely sure of the accurate definition, but we ensure that the proprietors of the business are aware of their responsibilities to maintain clear passage up and down the highway. Our operational staff, such as street cleansing operatives who are regularly in the city centre or in the district centres, will highlight dangers to their supervisors as they come across them. So we utilise our staff who are out in the city centre on a daily basis to report obstructions to us. Action to tackle wheelie bins which are not put away after they've been emptied and are causing obstruction are dealt with under powers held by us, the City Council, as Waste Collection Authority. These are dealt with as they are reported by residents of the waste team. The Clear Streets Charter, however, is not just about footway obstructions, and there are many other subjects included within it, such as planning for new developments, cafe licences, which I've described earlier, and design of public spaces, where the City Council has a much larger role in terms of the planning context. The full charter is available to view on our website in the Clean, Safe City section.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Mitchell, do you have a supplementary?
Yes, thank you for that. Is it a charter to be commended to all councillors and all members of the community? As this is a multifaceted and multi-agency issue, as you've already explained, would the policyholder support a scrutiny of the implementation of the charter? Would you support a scrutiny by this committee of the implementation of the charter?
Yes. Thank you. Yes, of course I would. But I think I have to warn you that the County Council have significant responsibilities in this area and are joint signatories to this charter, and in order to have a full and exhaustive discussion about that, we would need them to be present. Fully agree. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Harvey. Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Thank you to all the questioners. Very good questions, very interesting topics. I hope they're useful to take back to residents, answer some of residents' questions as well. So anyone who wants copies of the responses, please let Howard know. I'm sure that can be arranged. We move on to our presentation, which is item 7 on our agenda. That's a presentation on homelessness and associated issues to consider the report of the Deputy Chief Executive. I'm going to come to Councillor Denning to introduce the topic, as it was the topic that she submitted for consideration. Over to you, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. This has been put forward in the recent things about the moratorium of the evictions being lifted. And with the £20, or it actually equates to £87 a month, actually. People say £20 a month, £20 a week, it's £87 a month of people's benefits being cut. Now, we know that through the, through COVID, there were a lot of people who either were furloughed or have lost their jobs and have had to change their way of living. And obviously this has had a great impact. The worry is with the lifting of the evictions, what would happen if we don't know whether Exeter City Council, being the first port of call, could actually be swamped, and how do we cope with this? I'm not going to really talk a lot about this because I've looked through the slides and there's some really good stuff there, and I think it'll be good for people to do that. But would ask Chair perhaps if I can come back on it after that. So I leave everybody to listen and then we can come back to it.
Absolutely, we'll certainly bring you back in, Councillor Denning, and also probably to sum up at the end, so very happy to do that. At that point we will bring in the officers who are going to contribute, which I think is Laura Fricker and Richard Crompton. Laura first, over to you, Laura.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. So yeah, Richard and I are here to talk through what we do currently by way of support, including what our statutory obligations are, both as a council and as a landlord, because they're different, but also what discretionary help we provide and the limitations of that help. And I hope that by explaining our current process, and what we know about possible increased demand on the system, hopefully this will assist members in identifying if there are any areas that they wish to explore in any review. So I will be doing the first half of the presentation, then I'll hand over to Richard for the second half. Hello? Sorry, am I pressing the wrong button here? Top one. What to do it, Howard, and not just ask you to do
it. Wouldn't be a scrutiny meeting without tech.
Okay, this is who I am. I'm Laura Fricker. I'm the Service Lead for Revenues, Benefits and Customer Access. Because most of you won't have met me before, I just thought it would be helpful if I just showed you the areas that I've had responsibility for, and I've colour-coded them in the fact that the red areas are where we're giving, and the black activities are where we're taking, so a mixture of both there. But I hope to show you that even within the black activities, say like the collection of council tax, etc., that we're actually able to offer support, and that's what my slides will go through, will be the kind of support that we can offer. Next slide, please. So I had to think about what's posing a threat to income in the home, because as you've mentioned before, universal credit uplift being removed, but it's not just that that's posing a threat, so I thought it would be helpful to list some others as well. Working tax credit top-up was administered in a different way to the universal credit uplift, so that was a one-off payment of £500, and that hasn't been extended. Now, working tax credit will be for working customers, so potentially there's a vulnerability there as well. It's not just the universal credit uplift. The MIF reimposed. MIF is the minimum income floor, and that assumes a minimum amount of money that somebody, a self-employed person, is getting. That was removed for the early part of the pandemic, and that has since been reimposed. So that could be a potential problem for self-employed people who may be back at work, but their work has been impacted to some degree. The compliance is also being reintroduced. So compliance is If you're claiming universal credit, then you're expected to be looking for a job, and you have to record your activities and you have to respond to the job centre. And if they don't get the response, they're entitled to impose sanctions, and that's been reintroduced. A hold was put on that. However, we have been told that there will be a very soft approach to this initially, so hopefully not too much of a concern. You've mentioned also the furlough scheme ending. That ends this month, and we have no idea at this current time how that will affect the number of people going onto universal credit. So how many people will be new universal credit claimants? Food and fuel supply and cost, I think we all realise that both have increased dramatically. And the food supply and cost is also impacting the size of food bank parcels. As donations are down, so their parcels are smaller, yet there is an expected increase in demand obviously coming. With the winter pandemic, we don't yet know what the impact could be. Could it be a reflection of what it was this time last year? The eviction moratorium has been lifted. There's possible increase in levels of domestic violence being notified, and I think Richard will touch on that in his slides. And also there's a possible significant increase in council tax to fund social care. So there's quite a lot of that impacting on households on top of just the UC uplift. Next slide, please. So here is our statutory obligations. So as a council, we're administering housing benefit, local council tax support and discretionary housing payments, the test and trace support payment scheme, billing and collection of council tax, and the billing and collection of business rates. So we administer housing benefit and DHP on behalf of the Department for Work and Pensions, and both are support with housing costs. So only those getting housing benefit or the housing cost element of universal credit can be considered for discretionary housing payment support. The link to benefits mean we administer the test and trace support payments within my benefits and welfare team. This scheme has currently been extended to the end of March 2022, and there is talk of plans to extend it further, but not in the same way. It would be included as a payment within mainstream benefits. Beyond that, the support is linked to a threat of financial hardship. So as a billing authority, we're responsible for the collection of council tax and recovery of arrears on behalf of county fire and police, as well as ourselves, who rely on our collections to pay for their services. With business rates, it's a statutory tax used to fund local authorities. So whilst the council is set a baseline of funding for the services it needs, it is also allowed to keep a proportion of the rates it collects over and above this baseline. Therefore, it is critical for the council to maximise the amount it collects from business rates. So our first priority for resourcing has to be to meet our statutory obligations. However, within these resources, we try to give as much discretionary help as possible. It's probably true to say that we are better able to help those that are tenants, that are our tenants, than those that aren't. And those receiving benefits that those that aren't entitled to benefits. This is because as a landlord we have discretion on the kind of support and more control over the support that we can give people to meet their financial obligations, because we have that landlord-tenant agreement. Housing associations provide the same support to their tenants as we do. For those renting privately or with a mortgage, their first recourse is with their landlord or mortgage provider. Next slide, please. So here I've listed the discretionary funds we can draw on. Those in red are means-tested schemes. Therefore, eligibility relies on being on a low or no income. So they're not open to all. I've listed there local welfare support. Now, local welfare support came about when the Department for Work and Pension ceased to administer crisis loans and community care grants from April 2013. And we were able to set up a 3-year scheme of local welfare support, and that funding came from Devon County Council. No further funding has been received since 2016, but we were allowed to keep the funding that we had left, and we've been able to provide crisis support with that funding. In the main, this is utility top-ups for people. For that, costs run at approximately £1,400 per month over winter. From the local welfare support fund, we literally only have £6,000 left. So we can expect an increase in demand because of the changing seasons, plus the 12% utility cost increasing, plus the ending of the UC uplift. On that basis, unfortunately, we expect that fund to run out at Christmas. The COVID-19 Wellbeing Support Fund was set up during the pandemic, and that was utilising funding from county and from DEFRA. This fund isn't linked to benefits and remains our only budget to utilise for support currently. We've kept people in accommodation with no recourse to public funds while they've been waiting for visas, and this fund will take over from the local welfare support fund to provide utility top-ups, and in that fund we currently have £64,272 left, so it's not a lot. We're expecting the profile of who we would normally help, because usually the profile for people we normally help are those on benefits, but we're expecting that profile to change over the next few months. Other support available, and some of this has been, some of this information has been given already, is the Household Support Fund, is the first one. With the portfolio holder's permission, I've got some information on that. Is it okay if I provide that information now? Yeah. Okay. So the Household Support Fund, this information has literally come in today. The funding will actually go to upper tier and unitary authorities. So the funding is going to go to Devon County Council, and their indicative grant is about £5 million. Authorities are able to add funding to that or seek partner contributions. And the upper tier authorities are being encouraged to work collaboratively with districts and organisations to identify a broad range of vulnerable households across their local area, including working closely with professionals who work with vulnerable households, such as social workers and supporting family advisors. The scheme runs from the 6th of October to the 31st of March, and Devon County is expected to provide the Department for Work and Pensions with a summary of how they are planning to spend the Household Support Fund by the 29th of October. A minimum of 50% of the fund is to be used for families with children, but cannot be limited to just them. And the expectation is that the fund should primarily be used to support households in the most need with food, energy and water bills. It can also be used to support households with essential costs related to those items and with wider essential costs. And in cases of genuine emergency, in exceptional cases, it can be used to support housing costs, but only where other existing housing support has been exhausted. It mustn't be used for debt advice. A portion of the funding can be used for administration costs. It mustn't be used for mortgage costs. It's not to be tied to an employment status, and it's not restricted to vulnerable households in receipt of benefits. The Department for Work and Pensions will be providing relevant universal credit data and access to their Searchlight tool to enable those administering to do so. The relevant universal credit data they will be giving is universal claimants in the area of the authority whose income is below the free school meal and free prescription thresholds, and those with a limited capability for work indicator, and that's down to individual level as well as summary level by ward. Authorities can request applications for support, or they can proactively identify households who may benefit, or do a mixture of both. There is no requirement to undertake a means test or a benefit check. Next steps for this is we've received today communication from Devon County Council, who are very keen to work with district councils to support families. And to that end, they will be hosting an initial discussion next week. And also the Department for Work and Pensions has arranged a local authority conference call on the 11th of October at 2 o'clock, which I will attend, so I can feedback on that. So that's the Household Support Fund. Thank you. So the Warm Home Discount Scheme provides a £140 rebate on energy bills to low-income households. That scheme opens on the 18th of October. It's a one-off discount on someone's electricity or gas bill. Eligibility is based on getting the guarantee credit element of pension credit, or being on a low income and meeting the energy supplier's criteria for the scheme. We're not administering that. It can be applied for through Gov.uk, but of course staff are aware of these schemes and will help people to apply, and will refer them to those schemes. Same for the cold weather payment scheme. That starts on the 1st of November, and eligibility is dependent on getting certain benefits or support for mortgage interests. And recipients get £25 for each 7-day period of very cold weather between November and the end of March next year. The Holiday Activities and Food Program continues, and that ensures that the activities and meals provided over the Easter and summer holidays will also be provided over the Christmas holiday. The Healthy Start scheme provides vouchers to women who are pregnant or have children under 4, and that's to buy fruit, fresh fruit and vegetables, pulses, milk and vitamins. And the value of those vouchers has been increased by over a third since April. And the amount of hours of free childcare has been increased to 30 hours for working parents. That launched on the 1st of September. And that's valued at up to £5,000 per child per year. So as I said, when we work with customers, we're going to check that they are maximising their income and that they're getting everything that they're entitled to, and we will encourage them to apply. I put here a little bit on responsible debt collection, because I thought it would be helpful if I explain what we do for our tenants, then that might be helpful in explaining what housing associations do, what landlords can do, and what other mortgage suppliers can do. So responsible debt collection, what does it mean? We are a landlord, and the next couple of slides after this is going to show examples of how we support our tenants. So we have a responsibility to collect the rent owed to us. And while supporting residents in financial difficulty at this challenging time is a high priority, we must also protect the revenue stream for the council, as it relies on it to sustain our funds and services. So we don't enforce any arbitrary rules, we take a tailored approach. So an arbitrary rule would be something like all debts must be paid within 12 months within that financial year. If it isn't possible for somebody to do that, then we would be enforcing a rule that it couldn't be adhered to. So it's very much a tailored approach that we take. We're also trying to identify the can't payers from the won't payers, because if somebody can't pay, then we work with them to try and get them in a position where they are more resilient. If somebody is a willful won't payer, then we will escalate recovery against them quicker. What we aim to do is to stabilise someone's debt and encourage good payment behaviour, but that can take between 6 and 12 months sometimes in some cases. But that approach has proved successful in the long run for some rent accounts. Our tailored recovery approach means we're able to establish if there is vulnerability or any underlying circumstances preventing a tenant from paying their rent. Those whose circumstances highlight support needs, and this could be a variety of needs, it could be financial, medical, behavioural, or other. They are supported to establish sustainable ways to pay their liabilities, understanding that most people want to pay but may have a situation beyond their control and they need our support to get back on track. Next slide. So ways we support our tenants, we can revise the payment dates that are due, we can change the frequency that they pay to match the date that they get their benefits and they're more likely to pay. We check that tenants are claiming all they can claim. We check expenditure and advise where expenditure is high and could possibly be renegotiated, maybe mobile phone bills as an example. We can reprofile to give a payment-free window if a short window is going to help them to get back on track. And we can also signpost to other areas of support. There are grants available for particular professions which we can draw down on. We've had 2 cases which have been successful in getting help from the Women's Resilience Fund, and we've had 1 case which was successful in getting grant help from, because they were an ex-civil servant, and that helped to clear gambling debts, which then put them on a better financial footing. We utilise discretionary housing payments and or exceptional hardship funds to help people. We do affordability checks. Our benefit staff will do that if tenants are thinking of moving on, so that they don't move into somewhere that isn't sustainable for them or affordable. We can also use local welfare support for match funding. We don't do that in many cases, but it can be used as an incentive that for somebody to say, okay, if you pay £20 towards your arrears, we will match it from local welfare support to try and encourage that payment behaviour. Debt relief orders, if that's the only way of starting again, but if somebody does go down a debt relief order, our staff do step in to try and alter a change in behaviour, because we've run a project before whereby if behaviour doesn't change after that debt relief order is granted, people are soon getting in arrears again. And as I say, then we discourage IVAs because they cost people money, and there's plenty of support out there that we can help people to get without parting with their money. We can reduce attachment amounts, which is attachment from benefits. If we think it is suitable, we can offer wellbeing support through our wellbeing support line. We launched a request for financial support form over a year ago. So instead of speaking to us, people could actually contact us online at any time. And we received over 600 online requests for financial support through that. And also, because we were administering the business grants through COVID, we could also pick up where people might have been entitled to the business grant, so we were able to refer them to that as well. In this slide, we've combined the stories of 3 successful cases that all have similar circumstances. After lengthy periods to engage in conversations with the tenants, they trusted their senior collection officer, and they gave more information about themselves. And so from knowing what was preventing the tenants from paying, the officer could start to work on the root of their problems. So all 3 cases were encouraged and supported to successfully claim universal credit and other welfare benefit entitlements, to recognise their own income and expenditure patterns, and to start to understand what a priority debt was and how to plan a way forward to reduce unnecessary expenditure. They helped to budget for their essential bills. They were advised to seek professional independent debt advice. They understood that the officers were there to help and assist, not to evict them. And we were able to set up payment methods to ensure regular payments. We maintained regular contact with those 3 cases so that we were managing their rent accounts and arrears and we made arrangements with them to pay their other council debts, and they're all sustaining their payments to us. For case study 3, this was a single tenant with no dependents, had a long-standing history of poor payment, and it was escalated to court in November 2014, and we were given a suspended possession order. Following the court order, the tenant's payment pattern remained the same. They were either late with payments, or they made reduced payments, or simply missed them. This has resulted in a number of bailiff requests, however, the subsequent eviction date being postponed following the court's decision to suspend the warrant. There's been extensive contact with this tenant, and we've worked hard to allow for fluctuation in income or unforeseen changes of circumstances and be sensitive to underlying mental health issues. The tenant has spent periods of time in receipt of job seekers allowance and universal credit. During these periods, we've requested direct deductions and went on universal credit direct payments. They've also had periods of work, mostly worked for different companies as a delivery driver, often on very low pay and with running costs to meet. This has meant that their income has been sporadic, and we've allowed for this when making arrangements. We've undertaken income and expenditure reviews to establish what is affordable and suggested seeking financial advice. We've also made adjustments to arrangements when needed to pay for essential repairs on their car, without which they would be unable to carry out their work as a delivery driver. Likewise, we've allowed late payment when earnings have been delayed. This case took an interesting twist with the COVID-19 pandemic and the start of the lockdown. The increase in online shopping and home delivery meant that they were offered more work and their earned income increased. However, from social media posts, we were aware that they had used the increased income to finance the purchase and refit of a van and to pay for holidays rather than reduce their arrears. So we've discussed with them the need to use this period of increased work to tackle their debts, but it remains a case of continually chasing this tenant to secure payment, which is very resource intensive. But from past behaviour not to chase and engage, we know that those rent arrears will increase. So in some cases where we can be successful, other cases we have to literally be in contact almost on a daily basis. So other support that we can offer, but these would be to non-tenants. We can obviously look at their council tax payment plans for anybody and readjust them. We can offer them wellbeing support through our wellbeing support hub, and we can signpost them to for other advice and support elsewhere. What we can't do, because we're not regulated, is we cannot offer financial advice, and we mustn't do so. There is other support offered by other agencies, which would be the Money Advice Service, Citizens Advice, mortgage companies, social landlord welfare teams will be working very much in the way that we do with our tenants, and utility companies do offer support as well. Positive help for struggling residents at this time. There's been the introduction of the breathing space. So if somebody is in financial difficulty, then the breathing space does allow them some time to get professional help. Also, the pre-court protocol, there is now a commitment that everything that can be done to help somebody will be done before an eviction takes place. And what I can say from our point of view, when we actually issue a notice, that notice has got to clearly state what we've done to contact the customer, how we've helped, so that really we can show the court that everything has been exhausted, because they really want solutions to be found rather than evictions. So I hope I can alleviate some fears on evictions in that way. We do have quite a buoyant jobs market at the moment, so there are jobs to be applied for. The local housing allowance increase has been retained. Now, that was increased significantly in April 2020 as a response to the pandemic. For Exeter, this was an increase of between 9% in two-bed accommodation and 28% in non-self-contained accommodation. So this reset the rates to the 30th percentile after many years of real-term reductions. And the good news about that is it's not being returned to pre-COVID levels. And as already mentioned, the test and trace support scheme has been extended to March. The current service situation within my service, obviously the ongoing pandemic, we don't yet know the post-pandemic impact, and we don't know what's going to come from the furlough process coming to an end. We don't know how many people will lose employment and how many will become new universal credit claimants. Within my service, we're still actually in response mode to the pandemic. And what that means is we're still administering some business grants, we're still doing the reconciliation of that and the hardship relief for businesses. We still have the wellbeing hub support that we're administering, and also the test and trace support that takes resources out of benefits, and at times backlogs have occurred because of that. So business as usual has been left for 18 months because of this increased demand, and naturally there is an exhausted workforce. We also have a need to make savings, so we do need to look at redesigning our service so that we can make those savings. And as I mentioned earlier, the depleted discretionary funds, obviously there's some good news with the household support fund, but within our own discretionary funds, local welfare support fund has all but run out, and the COVID wellbeing support fund is now down to £64,000, so it can't be relied upon to give help to everyone with rent arrears. Our discretionary housing payment allocation as well this year has been reduced by 24%, but luckily at the moment demand is low. So my last slide here is some possibilities and financial impacts that you may want to consider. I'm not recommending these, but I just want to make you aware. With discretionary housing payments, our pot of money can be, from the government contribution, can be up to 2.5 times higher than what we actually spend. Normally we spend only the government contribution. Based on 2021-22 allocation, there would be a cost to the council, and that would be approximately £282,000 if we were to do that. The Exceptional Hardship Fund, that's a cost shared by ourselves, county and preceptors. The Exeter City Council share is only about 8.2%, but we could increase that pot if we wanted to, and obviously the amount that it would be, the current cost to Exeter City Council is £3,000. We could also look at our council tax support scheme. As you all know, at the moment our maximum award that we give is 80%, so we could look to increasing that to anywhere between 80 to 100% if that was to be helpful, but obviously there would be huge cost implications to that, although again most of the cost for that is borne by county, but figures can be supplied if they are needed. I'll hand over to Richard.
Thank you very much, Laura. And it might be an opportunity actually before we bring Richard in I'm sure for all members will join me in thanking you and your incredible team for the last year and a half. I know it's been an incredibly intense period, and without you, there have been a lot of people who would have gone under. So really, thank you. And please pass on to your colleagues. Thank you. Richard, I'm conscious of time.
Yes.
Speed on as much as you can. Thank you very much.
You preempted beautifully. So good evening, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Richard Crompton. I'm the Housing Needs and Homelessness Service Lead. So Laura has covered quite comprehensively a lot of the measures that have been raised in Councillor Denning's question to scrutiny. So you'll be glad to know that I'll just be picking up 2 of them, which on one of Laura's earlier slides, there were approximately 10 issues in terms of challenges. And the 2 that I'm picking up are the evictions and the domestic violence. and the possible impact on the council and what measures we've got in hand. In similar style also, I'll just run through, if I may, some of the measures that we are already operating as a service, just for your assurance, and then I'll turn on to what else that we could possibly be doing. So, briefly, I think it's probably all evident, whether it's anecdotal or evidence and data supported, is that there is an increase to people being evicted and households being evicted from predominantly private lettings and private rental backgrounds, but it has also been happening in social housing increasingly over the period of the last 18 months, albeit in relatively low numbers. And I'll come on to the domestic abuse statistics, but primarily just to give you an idea about what the possible increased demands are, looking at our statistics, I can give you some heart in that we're not at the moment experiencing a tsunami of approaches and presentations of people, both coming from evictions from the private rental market and also those coming as victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence. However, we are seeing a slow but steady small increase. So just to give you an idea, in terms of the evictions to start with, at the moment, if I compare to the last 2 years, we've had a relatively steady number of evictions over 2019-2020. In 2021, the first part of the year, it's remained relatively steady. We've had 39 evictions in that 6-month period from January to June, but in the last 3 months we've had 24 evictions. So on that profile, the evictions are heading at the moment towards a 25% increase for this year alone. That's not to be, that wasn't a surprise to us. We did some profiling around the evictions moratorium, ended as the slide says on the 31st of May. And whilst notice periods were extended, what we anticipated is we would begin to see the impact of that in the autumn. And so what we're seeing just at the beginning now is the curve of probably that 25% starting to come into play. So we anticipate through October, November, December and into January, we're most likely to see a bit of a convergence of the number of evictions. But at the moment, our profiling suggests that we're not going to see more than 25% increase, which is approximately 11 or so on our current 3-month figure. So another 11 on top for the next 3 months. So we have done some market research, of which Councillor Williams has presented some information earlier. So the private rental market is under increasing pressure, and as we've heard earlier, landlords predominantly locally have been mainly selling properties and leaving the market, predominantly due to the increased house prices. So that's an pressure in terms of the evictions as well, is that there's less actual supply currently on the market in terms of housing. I will say right now, because I'll say at the end, we're keeping a very close eye on this, constantly monitoring this on week-to-week basis. And so what I say now, of course, I'm conscious could change over the next 2, 4, 6 weeks. So once we've done that profiling, there are obviously a number of unknowns out there, so things are subject to change. In terms of domestic abuse, just to give you some data as well, so over the last 2 years our figures have maintained relative stability over 2019-2020. On average, approximately we get about 11 or 12 presentations per month, where the presenting issue is someone fleeing either a domestic abuse or a sexual violence case in the home. In 2021, that profile again has remained relatively stable, so very similar to evictions. The first 6 months has been quite stable, same sort of numbers, but we have in the last 3 months seen an increase, and that's at the moment around about 50% extra cases increasing, so about 5 additional households coming to us since the Domestic Abuse Act went live after the end of May. And so we are seeing some further households coming to us. What that doesn't necessarily mean is that it means more people need to then come into the council's temporary accommodation, because it's not necessarily the case that presentations equals more people coming into temporary housing. There are various prevention measures in place, and I'll touch on those in a minute. So the message in terms of presenting demand is we are seeing a steady incremental increase, but it is relatively small at this moment in time. We're keeping a close eye on it. So it wouldn't be right for me to present anything about homelessness and the current challenges without just touching on other aspects that are also, I think, cited and mentioned in Scrutiny in terms of winter pressure, and of course that impacts predominantly in my area for rough sleepers. So I just wanted to touch on this as another challenge that obviously the pandemic and some of the cuts to services and benefits and welfare products is also impacting. We have measures in place around how to reduce some of our rough sleeping challenges at the moment, and predominantly they are increasing the housing supply. You won't be surprised to hear, and I think I've already covered a number of measures in previous presentations, but just to refresh you, we have a number of rough sleeper specific units coming on board, procured by the council. So far today we've had 15 that are live, so 15 new homes for rough sleepers. There are 15 to follow this month, so we'll have a total of 30 delivered online for rough sleepers. And we are partway through supporting one of our main housing organisations recent to the scene, Exeter Community Trust, in providing prioritised spaces for 60 rough sleepers, up to 60 of their spaces for rough sleepers. And just to mention as well, we've also got 6 units set aside for rough sleepers that need protection from COVID risks and risks around their public health. So there are bed spaces available in the onset of an outbreak amongst the rough sleeping community. In terms of winter pressures as well, there will be further information to follow around what the council is doing for winter provision for predominantly rough sleepers, and we are at the moment setting up conversations to re-enact our safe sleep provision as a last resort, but primarily we are working around the premise that a number of those units are coming on board, so we expect to see our rough sleeping population reduce over the next couple of months, but also we've got some contingency backup plans around procuring some extra accommodation through hotels and bed and breakfasts. So I'm just going to spend the next 6 slides are really just as Laura has set out the statutory obligations that the council is under in terms of benefits and welfare. I wanted to set our statutory obligations out, but be very brief with them. So the 2 main statutory obligations in terms of homelessness prevention is we have a duty to assess homelessness and assess whether somebody is likely to be homeless within 56 days, so 8 weeks or sooner, and if they are homeless, then we have a duty to relieve their homelessness, so by providing alternative accommodation. There are other duties within those main duties under the homelessness legislation, such as the provision of advice at the outset, and also at the end of the journey, if you like, we do have main duties where we have to discharge households into permanent accommodation. Next slide, please. Thank you. Good cues. So one of the questions that's been raised is what can we do and what can we do better? So just pointing out again, what are we currently doing in terms of our statutory obligations? Most of our work, understandably, is around interventions at an early stage as much as possible to prevent homelessness. So our expected obligation is that at the point of 8 weeks where a household is at risk of homelessness, we will intervene. We have a statutory obligation to undertake a certain amount of measures that are recorded, and various letters and communications are made with each household. However, next slide please. The emphasis is obviously to work on early intervention, and what we try and do, and again in terms of getting ahead of any potential demand coming to the council and the service, is working on a number of streams to ensure that we at the earliest can identify where a household is at risk of homelessness. So we do that with digital applications, so we have online applications in terms of individuals can refer when they are at risk or feel that they may be at risk of homelessness under pressure from a landlord or possibly falling behind in arrears, And again, Laura's mentioned some of the interventions that services currently do around that. So we have on-site online forms for people to request housing assistance, and they can do that through the website at the moment, which we're working on to improve some of the presentation around that, but also through the portal that we have through our housing advice database, which has a live portal for customers to approach us through that portal. We also have significant avenues through our partner agencies who have a statutory obligation called the duty to refer, which is a duty for any of our statutory partners such as prisons, Department of Pensions and DWP basically, and social services and the like, to refer to the council when they feel that there's a household or an individual at risk of homelessness. We extend that to our partners locally, so those non-statutory partners, particularly registered social landlords, where we also ask them to do a duty to refer to us, even though it's not their statutory obligation, but in terms of good practice to refer in advance as possible. In terms of also within the council, again, Laura's touched on some of these processes, but we also work with a lot of our colleagues and in internal departments to ensure that we get a heads up as early as possible where there may be a risk of homelessness. So typical examples are where we have an advocacy requirement, say for all council tenants who may be at risk of eviction, where we can maybe provide an alternative accommodation or emergency accommodation, or indeed even a swap or something like a direct match with Lawrence's service. And then in terms of payments and collections, typically where there are arrears, if welfare and benefits need some additional support, we can also step in to provide some financial incentives to reduce arrears. Institutional discharge is obviously one of the other areas which we work with as well, getting advanced, updated with the likes of prisons and hospitals. So whilst those are statutory services that fall under the duty to refer, quite often we will get cases where you'll get early release from prison, unexpected, and they haven't done a duty to refer to us yet, or we've only just received it, and similarly unplanned departures from hospital. So in terms of a bit more further upstreaming, so ways in which we focus on early intervention, we also do a significant amount of work within the team to work with the earlier housing issues with our partner agencies, so not just referrals but also participating in part of the meetings. So we work very closely with children's services, particularly the early help agenda and the family agenda, which there are models such as troubled families and target families, where again a number of agencies will have flagged to us that there may be a risk of homelessness through a vulnerable household, or it may be a household that's at risk through to financial issues and pressures. As part of intervention, obviously not all of our interventions and early interventions result in a prevention of homelessness, but some of the ways in which we can also bolster our prevention, some of the work we currently do is around the housing access team, and I think you've got some information from the July notes from the July meeting around housing access's work. But predominantly, prior to a household who are at risk of homelessness becoming homeless, we'll work with them to try and find an alternative move into the private rented sector, for example. Or it might be that if a household tenancy is breaking down due to antisocial behaviour or other reasons, then we'll work to move them into supported or social housing wherever is relevant. Anything that works from a suitable and affordable position to avoid homelessness, and then therefore counting as a prevention. Our Homeless Prevention Fund, again similar to discretionary funds, we use upwards of £100,000 per annum to support people to avoid homelessness. The type of interventions are typically anything from rent in advance and deposits, storage and removals, starter packs for new homes, individual budgets, and that extends to rough sleepers as well. We have individual budgets to pay for everything from basic provision through to education and opportunities for learning, and through to other elements such as paying off small amounts of rent arrears as long as we've got a repayment plan, and as Laura's touched on, an education programme to ensure that there's learning from that. We also provide things for core costs as well. And personal housing plans, a really key element of how we continue to work with prevention is to ensure that our customers have responsibility, that we have clear accountability for their actions as well as our actions. So basically our contract with each household that's at risk of homelessness or homeless themselves, we make sure that there are clear actions so that they are able to learn and develop their own self-help techniques. And just finally on this, other measures under our statutory obligations, but working upstream, we obviously do some signposting and support because we can't solve everything, so we've got specialist partner agencies around, and here's just a few examples of some of the work, particularly those that are tackling and helping households be supported in their financial challenges. And I think has already been mentioned, as contract with citizens advice around well-being and cost issues. But also we have specialist service within that contract, a subcontract with Homemaker, working around productive ways of reducing debt and not just going to debt relief orders and the like. And the court desk obviously is also someone who helps us significantly with interventions with our at-risk clients. So I think in order to embrace the question of really how can we be better, we're constantly striving towards the continuous improvement agendas, and I've just given some examples really about how we can get further upstream to increase that earlier intervention, particularly, as I said at the beginning, with the identification that there is a slow increase in the number of people being evicted and the number of people presenting to us from domestic violence incidents. So again, on the digital element, we are trying to provide more information and advice on the website. We've got some guides on the website that aren't easiest to find at times, so we're rerouting those at the moment, and they're specific around particular either protected characteristics or specific needs, including domestic violence. Updating our communications to maximise early interventions. So we know that we need to ensure that we're working with those partner agencies in a more proactive way, but we're also giving more time to that as well, so ensuring that every officer and every meeting we actually make sure that we've got somebody present. So if somebody's on leave, we make sure we've got a substitute, which is no mean feat given the amount of challenge in the service at the moment. Self-help guides is a piece of work that we're developing at the moment. Again, it seems fairly obvious to try and give people as much advanced information as possible, but actually in different formats, so people have easy read self-help guides that don't get into the bureaucracy and the terminology that can be unhelpful for people. It's a piece of work that we're pushing upstream at the moment. And then finally, linking in with the RSLs, the Registered Social Landlords, to promote more referrals for those threatened with homelessness. Again, it sounds obvious and something that you'd ordinarily expect us to do on the tin, but what we're actually working on there is some safety net protocols. So we've had eviction protocols in place in the city to prevent anybody basically falling out of particularly supported housing, but also some social housing. We're building on those at the moment to provide some safety nets, including some crash pad accommodation. These are plans, they're not in motion at the moment, but again, they're pieces of work that we are doing to try and improve what we're currently doing at the moment. So I'll just bring up the rear to say, similar to what Laura has said, the main emphasis I'm making here is that we are making a lot of interventions at early stage and prevention stage to prevent homelessness. And my main response to the increasing pressure is we have some new units of accommodation coming on board, even though they're targeted at the rough sleeper community. But what I would emphasise for you to understand is that the more we accommodate rough sleepers in specific specialised units, the more we free up some of our temporary accommodation and some of our private rented lets as well. And that's where we would then divert those households that we're not successful in preventing, who may be coming to us over the next few months, that would constitute an increase in our demand. So there is a risk in that factor. We do need our supply chain to deliver the accommodation that we're already targeting and that we're procuring but waiting to deliver at the moment. And as I say, we've been very fortunate to have a new RSL coming into the city in terms of Exeter Community Trust, who've been a godsend in delivering absolutely essential new units to us. So we're quite reliant on the supply of those units to help us mitigate the potential increases at the moment. However, as I said earlier, we're constantly monitoring that demand, and I need to be mindful about having contingency plans in place. And again, I'm not making recommendations, but I'm just informing that at the moment the contingency plans we have, over and above all the interventions I've talked through, are to ensure that we have more capacity at assessment level, because the casework officer team at the moment is stretched. The average caseload is 50 per casework officer, which is quite high with the degrees of complexity now in homelessness compared to sort of 5 or so years ago. So I am considering where we can get additional officer support into the team, and happily, as part of the Domestic Abuse Act, you may be aware that the Tier 1 authority, Devon County Council, received funding like all areas in support of interventions to increase not just the housing supply but also the support, the bespoke support to victims. And as part of the Tier 1, Tier 2 organisation, each of the local districts were paid a small fund to support their work. It's in the region of £35,000, so I'm proposing to use that to employ as much of a full-time officer to help us work specifically with those victims and the perpetrators of domestic violence, but also to help us pick up some of the work that's presenting to us with new evictions. Having said that, as I said earlier, not all presentations end up going into temporary accommodation, but in profiling the potential impact on temporary accommodation, on the basis of 1 in 5 approaches end up in temporary accommodation on average at the moment, for the next foreseeable 18 months. If we were to have the same sort of profile increase that I mentioned earlier, 25% on evictions and up to 50% in domestic violence presentations, we would need approximately another £100,000 in our temporary accommodation budget to cope with those that do need to come into emergency accommodation. However, I'm glad to also just remind the committee that we do have, again with the Trust, a model at the moment. Exeter City Council is one of only 11 pilots in the country developing a domestic violence and sexual abuse specific housing pathway, and we've got 9 units of our temporary accommodation set up and free and waiting at the moment for new presentations, and then we have a number of move-on units again afforded through 2 of our local RSLs. And the final point there, in terms of increasing housing resettlement capacity, of course, for those households that we don't prevent from becoming homeless and do come into our accommodation, then we have an ongoing duty, and not only to sign off our main discharge duties, but to find them housing for a minimum of 12 months tenancies. And so at the moment, my housing access team who works on that remit, again, are very heavily worked, and I would need some additional capacity there, which would probably be in the region of £40,000. So overall, to put some contingency in place, I'm probably citing in the region of 150,000 that would cover us if things significantly change from now.
Thank you, Richard. That's very helpful. There's a lot of detail here, and it's obviously a really big subject that we've embarked on, Councillor Benning. Thank you. But we might want to now focus down a little bit from that. We haven't got a huge amount of time. Really, we shouldn't go on beyond 7:30, but we can a little bit if members are willing to, are prepared to and want to contribute and ask questions and have a little discussion. Anybody want to come in? Councillor Henson.
This is
microphone.
Richard obviously has taken a great deal of time to put this.
Is your microphone on, Councillor Henson? Sorry. Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Is it read that it's on? Right. I was just saying the officers have done a considerable amount of time. A lot of this, mind you, is already statutory anyway, and a lot of it was news to me, and I appreciated the news bit for me, and I know I've been here a long time, but the point on this was is to make life a little easier for our officers with the problems that might be facing this council. And it's not only here, it's other parts of the country as well. For example, domestic abuse, anything on the lockdown that has come, that is particularly interesting, not for the person involved, but is there pilot money for this domestic abuse? If Exeter is doing a runner on this to experiment, I'm wondering if there is money available for this, and I would be interested to hear if there is. But when you talk about pre-court protocol, this has been in for quite some time. The courts have been very sympathetic, I think, to people who have difficulties, and I think the courts will continue to do that. But I do think this report is just a little bit too long, repeating itself. But I do appreciate the work that the officers have done, and I'm not regulating or arguing the fact that work is done, but when officers make a report like this, they're taken away from other parts that is possibly their need to be helpful. And I think we've got to be careful when the reports like this, it is in depth, but I think I would have preferred this, instead of being here and being rushed through, I'd like to have gone through different parts of it. And it might have been helpful, Chair, if indeed this was separated to just that.
Okay,
and
well,
then we could discuss that.
I think that's a helpful comment, Councillor Henson. Thank you. I think that, as you'll be aware, part of the process with this is that with the pro forma forms that you as members complete, that goes to the senior management board for them to look at. And one of the questions they will ask, have we got capacity? Have our officers got capacity to put this report together? So it would have been run through that, and we're very mindful on the Scrutiny Program board, I'm sure Councillor Mitchell will agree, that we don't put them to unnecessary work. But this is a big topic, I agree, and I think what we need to try and do now actually is where we go, how we move this ahead, what our next stage is. I agree, I think it's too big a topic for us to deal with scrutiny-wise easily, so maybe we look at focusing in, and Councillor Denny will bring in a minute, I'm sure will help on what aspects of that is. But before I do, any other comments or questions to our officers while we have them here? Councillor Ward, please.
Yes, it just strikes me in relation to the increase that's been mentioned. I mean, 50 cases per officer for casework capacity strikes me as being a great deal of work. And I think it's essential, really, if we can do it, not to take money away from this service in budget cuts, because we will end up with more of the type of thing we see on display outside the Guildhall at the moment, sleeping rough. So, that's the point I'd like to make on that. This is increasing, whatever happens, and we need the staff to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. That's helpful. I think that is probably an aspect of what we might want to look at, is that 50 cases per officer burden on them at the moment. And as you rightly say, I think all of the scrutiny topics we come to now, we have to bear in mind the financial situation we're in. I think we as members need to be mindful of that. So no good this committee recommending lots of expensive additional costs to any of the topics we cover. So it's about, we're going to have to look at ways perhaps that will help them. It also needs to be beneficial, as we've talked about, in terms of their time. It needs to be beneficial. So that may be one aspect. Councillor Denny, shall I bring you in now? I'm not looking at seeing anyone else indicate. So, yeah, Councillor Denny, please come on.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to thank Laura and David. I think that was, okay, it was a long report, but we have all learned a lot from it, and I think it was very good. I've learned a lot. In fact, My original paper that I put in for the consideration of the Scrutiny Committee was just for the first point of call, okay, and you know, obviously it's been expanded, so perhaps we could look into it even more. With the 50 Council of Order, you know, bringing up about 50 cases per worker is an awful lot, okay, is that going to increase? With the evictions that David said that were sort of 24 in 3 months, whereas only 39 in a couple of years before, that is an awful lot, you know, and so we have to think about what is going to happen in 3, 4, 5 months' time when the effects of the furlough was kicked in, about the £87 a month not being paid to people. You know, all what Councillor Walcott brought up about the heating and everything like that. More people could be knocking on our door, because it is our door. We are Exeter City Council, and we have to think about, will we be ready for these people? And this is what my original document was about. What can we do to ensure that these people are helped? And also the people who work as Exeter City Council employees, because for their mental health as well, because it must actually impact on them to hear such sometimes horrific stories. So what my proposal would be, and I am making a proposal, is that we can have a small working group, okay, just to, I know that Laura did say that they were thinking about redesigning some things, that we can actually go into that, look into it, see if we can, I won't say streamline because I hate that word, okay, and I always think, having been previously a trade union official, whenever a manager said, no, we always do it that way, we said, look, get some people in, have a look, and then they were always surprised about, actually, yeah, you may have done it all that way all the time, but if you do it this way, it may help, and ideas were better. So it's always good to look outside the box. So I'm proposing that we have a small working group, not to take a lot of time away from officers, because I totally agree with that, to see what can be done and possibly help people that could be knocking on our doors in the future, and perhaps even save a bit of money by it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Nets. That's really helpful. We've got so we have a proposal on the table now. Do we have a seconder for that proposal? Thank you, Councillor Ward. Thank you. And just to outline my understanding of that, which is that we would be setting up a working group, which could be a task and finish group, which is usually the term we use internally, and that isn't necessary. I think that differentiates from spotlight review by being perhaps a series of meetings. It might be 2 or 3 rather than spotlight review, usually 1. And that would be able to invite other parties in. So it might be that Exeter Community Trust, who've been mentioned a number of times earlier, would be good people to talk to. Citizens Advice, absolutely. That we might want to invite Citizens Advice for an all members briefing, actually. Looking at the current workloads, trying to see where there may be ways to ease that, whether there be ways to find some efficiencies money-wise, redesign of some of these systems, websites. Does that sound, I'm looking over at Richard and Laura and Councillor Williams, kind of affirmation that sounds a reasonable expectation from this committee? I'm getting some reasonable nods.
I just want to say that, I just want to say to the people in the House that this is not I'm not criticising it at all, because they do a fantastic job. My own daughter had problems 4 or 5 years ago, and the housing, they were absolutely brilliant, and I just think that this will help, and I really want you to say thank you to the housing people who actually do it, and please help them. This is not a criticism of any of their work. Okay.
No, absolutely. Really important. We need to help. We need to be of assistance, see what we can do as councillors. Okay, well, we have that proposal. All those in favour that way forward, what we'll do is we'll put some meat on the bone. We'll take it back, Michael and I, to the Scrutiny Program Board, which meets next Thursday, and we'll try and come to a sort of a way forward, let you all know about that. We'll get the Senior Management Board to okay that and run it by officers to make sure that everybody understands where we are, because I appreciate we're running out of time, everyone's a bit tired, there's a lot to take on board, and it's a little vague at the moment, but I think we've got an outline. So all those in favour of that proposal, that way forward, that appears to be unanimous. Apart from Councillor, abstaining Councillor, thank you. Okay, right, thank you. Well, we will come back and communicate how we're going to do that, and that will include who wants to sit on that task and finish group. So it will probably be Councillor Denning with any other volunteers from this committee, but it could also be outside this committee. Thank you, Councillor Martin, that's noted as volunteered. Okay, so we will move to item number 8, which is really just for noting, just to make you aware, the forward plan of business is a really useful tool. There's a link here on this agenda, so if you've got this agenda electronically, you can click on that. It takes you through to the document, which is business coming forward over the next few months to the council, some of the decisions that are coming our way via executive, and that's quite a useful tool if you want to have a think about the sorts of topics we at Scrutiny can look at, and then you need to do your pro forma, which comes to our board and goes to senior management board, as I mentioned earlier. So that's just for noting. The date of the next meeting is Thursday, the 2nd of December. We don't know, I guess, where we're going to be, maybe here, but we will see. So thank you very, very much to all of our portfolio holders and our officers for their considerable time and effort this evening. We had quite a lot of interesting questions and a lengthy discussion, but I hope it was useful. Thank you, members, for your time.